The air in the pawnshop was thick with the smell of old paper and broken dreams. Dust motes danced in the lone shaft of light slicing through the grimy window, illuminating the glass counter where I just laid the last piece of my old life. It was a simple gold band, thin and worn, with a tiny, almost invisible chip on the inside. My mother's wedding ring. The man behind the counter, a gaunt, quiet man with eyes that had seen too many desperate moments, picked it up with a practiced, gentle care. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The story was etched on my face, in the way my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to snatch it back, to run from this place and hold onto the one tangible link I had left to the woman who was gone. But my car was on E, I had a single granola bar left in my purse, and the cheap motel room I'd found was about to kick me out. I looked down at my hands, at the empty space where her ring was supposed to be, and felt a cold, hollow ache. My mind drifted back 3 days, to the night Jareth had looked at me with eyes so cold they felt like a stranger's. I had pleaded with him, begged for an explanation, for a reason why he could look at me that way after everything we'd been through. Now, as the man laid out a small stack of bills, my stomach twisted. The money felt like a betrayal. I stared at the ring for one last moment, a silent goodbye to a memory before I took the money. He didn't even know. Not yet. I had one card left to play. Before I begin this story, can you tell me where in the world you're listening to from? Life with Jareth had always been a series of small, hard-won victories and countless moments of holding our breath. Our apartment, a third-floor walk-up in a brick building with a perpetually peeling fire escape, was less a home and more a shared monument to our mutual brokenness. The couch springs were shot, the kitchen cabinets wouldn't close all the way, and the oven door was a constant temperamental challenge, but we had made it ours. We had a pact. Every penny we had went toward the bills, and every spare moment was spent dreaming of a future that felt just out of reach. Jareth worked 2 jobs, a graveyard shift stocking shelves and a weekend gig at a car wash, and I hustled, selling the pottery I made from a small studio I rented in the back of an abandoned warehouse. It was my mother's old studio, a place that held her scent and her memory, and keeping it alive felt like the only connection I had left to her since she died. Every day was a grind, a constant negotiation between our wants and our needs, a tightrope walk over the chasm of financial despair. But we did it together, or at least I thought we did. We had built a life on hope and on the shared understanding that we had nothing to lose but each other. And for a long time that had felt like enough. I remember the day it all changed. It was a Tuesday. I was on my hands and knees on the worn linoleum floor, trying to coax the last quarter bag of flour into a mixing bowl for a batch of my ceramic glaze, when Jareth burst in. He was holding a small piece of paper, a white crumpled rectangle with a faded logo on the top. He had this wide, breathless grin on his face, the kind he only had when he was telling me about some far-fetched dream he had. He always bought a lottery ticket on Tuesdays from the corner store, a dollar ritual that was more a joke than an actual investment. I had laughed at him 1,000,000 times for it, teasing him that our fortune was never going to come from a quick pick. I told him our fortune would be built with our hands, from the clay in my studio and the sweat on his brow. He just winked and said, "What if it's both?" I told him to go on with his day, that I was busy, that I had to finish the order for the gallery if we were going to make rent. He didn't say anything, just went into the living room, and I heard the faint rustle of the paper. I dismissed it as one of his silly games, a quick fantasy before he went back to the grim reality of our lives. The silence that followed was what first caught my attention. It was too quiet. The floorboards didn't creak, the water in the sink didn't run, and I didn't hear him flipping through the channels like he usually did. It was a heavy, unnatural silence, the kind that settles in a room when something has been fundamentally altered. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans, and walked to the doorway. He was standing there in front of the TV, the light from the screen washing over his face, making him look pale and unnatural. He wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't even breathing. His eyes, fixed on the screen, were wide and unblinking, like he was looking at a ghost. The crumpled paper was still in his hand, but it was no longer a joke. It was a piece of paper that held our lives in the balance. I opened my mouth to say something, to ask him what was wrong, but no sound came out. My heart, which had been beating steadily just moments before, began to pound in my chest. a frantic drum against my ribs. Something was wrong. Something had shifted. The world around us, the small, simple world we had built, was suddenly tilting on its axis, and I was about to be flung off. I took a step toward him, a deep sense of dread coiling in my stomach, and I saw his hand begin to shake. His fingers were trembling so violently that the ticket threatened to fall from his grasp. I felt a chill run down my spine, a cold premonition of what was to come. I tried to speak, to call his name, but my throat was tight. His knuckles were white against the pale ticket, and his face, once filled with that easy, hopeful smile, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked at me, and his eyes weren't the ones I knew. They were the eyes of a stranger. My own breath caught in my throat. I couldn't look away. I had to know. The air between us was electric, charged with a horrifying suspense. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation for the shift, for the profound change in his demeanor. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving me gasping for breath. The weight of his gaze was a physical thing, pressing down on my chest, threatening to crush me. I had a terrible feeling I was about to learn a secret that would change everything, and not for the better. The silence was deafening, the only sound the frantic beating of my own heart. I took another step toward him, and he finally looked away from the screen, turning his head slowly toward me. The fear was gone from his face, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve that I had never seen before. It was a look that told me, in no uncertain terms, that the man I had loved was gone. The next 2 days were a blur of hushed phone calls and closed doors. Jareth became a ghost in his own home. He was there, but he wasn't. He ate in silence, staring at his phone with an intensity that made me feel like an intruder in my own life. I tried to talk to him, to ask him what was going on, to find out what had changed, but he would just grunt, turn away, or leave the room altogether. The shift was so sudden, so total, that it was a physical blow to the stomach. The warmth was gone, the easy laughter and the shared silence replaced by a tense, suffocating quiet. I knew something was wrong, something beyond the usual day-to-day stress of our lives. I tried to convince myself that maybe he was just tired, that his long hours were finally getting to him. But deep down I knew it was something more. It was a fear that lived in my stomach, a cold, hard knot that grew bigger with every unanswered question. I kept thinking back to that night, to his terrified face and to the way he had looked at me. It felt like a memory from a different lifetime. I felt a growing sense of panic. My world was shrinking, and I didn't know how to stop it. I was losing him, and I had no idea why. I came home from my pottery studio late on Thursday night, exhausted and smelling of damp clay and linseed oil. The apartment was quiet. The lights were off. I walked into the living room and saw a suitcase by the door. My heart dropped. I stared at the suitcase, a small battered black thing I'd had since high school, and felt the blood drain from my face. I walked into the bedroom, and he was there, sitting on the edge of the bed, putting on his shoes. He didn't look up. He didn't say a word. He was just getting ready to leave. I had been so wrong. It wasn't just a shift. It was a departure. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation, any explanation, that could make sense of this. I thought of other women, of betrayal, of a quiet, secret life he'd been living. But that didn't feel right. That didn't explain the fear I had seen on his face. This was something different. This was colder. I finally found my voice, a small, trembling whisper. "Where are you going, Jareth?" I asked, and the sound felt foreign in the silent room. He didn't answer. He just stood up, zipping up his jacket, and grabbed the suitcase. My entire world was falling apart, and he was just leaving. I couldn't just let him go. I stood in front of the door, blocking his path, my hands outstretched, begging him with my eyes to tell me what was going on. He sighed, a long, exasperated sound that made me feel small and pathetic. He looked at me, not with love or even anger, but with a detached, clinical pity. "Move, Maribel," he said, his voice flat and empty. I felt a deep, profound sadness. This wasn't the man I loved. This wasn't the man who had held my hand through the night when I was scared after my mother died. This was a stranger wearing his face. I shook my head. "No," I said, the word coming out as a shaky, defiant whisper. "I'm not moving until you tell me what's going on. What happened to us?" He laughed, a short, humorless bark that sent a chill down my spine. He shook his head, looking down at the ground, as if he was talking to himself. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he said. "It's too big." I grabbed his arm, and he flinched away, as if my touch was poison. He looked at me with those cold, empty eyes again. "I won the lottery," he said, the words a hammer blow to my chest. He said it so simply, so casually, as if he was telling me he had bought milk. I blinked, trying to process the words. "What?" I whispered. "How much?" He smiled then, a small, tight, joyless smile. 29 million, he said, and the numbers felt like a physical weight, pressing down on the air between us. I just stood there, staring at him, the world spinning on a new horrifying axis. I couldn't form a single thought. 29 million, the number was so big it was meaningless. The only thing that made sense was the suitcase by the door. He had won the money, and he was leaving me. I felt a raw, animalistic anger rise up inside of me, hot and fast. "How could you?" I finally managed to choke out. "After everything, you're just going to leave?" He shrugged, pulling his arm away from my grasp. The touch felt like a memory, a phantom limb that no longer belonged to me. "You don't fit, Maribel," he said, his voice a low, brutal whisper. "I have a new life now, a big life. Your baggage, you and your broken dreams and your little clay figures and your studio that's always one bill away from being closed down. You don't fit in a mansion on a yacht in a world where I can have anything I want." He looked at me then, a long cold look that felt like a final goodbye, a dismissal of our entire history. "I'm sorry," he said, but the words were a lie. There was no apology in his eyes. There was only a chilling finality. I felt my stomach lurch. The world felt like it was breaking apart. He turned and walked out the door, the small suitcase in his hand, leaving me standing there in the cold, silent apartment. The lock clicked behind him, a small, final sound that felt like the end of the world. He was gone, and he had left nothing but the silence and the cold. But he had forgotten one thing. He had forgotten the key to the studio. He had forgotten the small, leather-bound book on the desk, the book that held every single one of my mother's secrets. The lock clicked, and the sound echoed in the empty apartment. I stood there, frozen, the reality of what had just happened crashing over me in cold, unforgiving waves. He was gone. He had won a fortune, and in the same breath he had erased me. The air was heavy, suffocating. I felt the familiar walls of the small apartment closing in on me, but they were no longer a refuge. They were a tomb. Every picture on the wall, every misplaced shoe, every worn-out book, was a screaming monument to a life that no longer existed. My hands, which had been so steady just an hour before, were now shaking uncontrollably. I walked to the window, the cold glass a shock against my forehead, and stared out at the street below. He was gone. He wasn't even there. The world was moving on without me, without a backward glance, and I was left standing in the wreckage of a life I had so carefully built. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest, a shard of glass that had lodged itself deep inside. It was a new kind of pain, different from the grief of losing my mother. This was a pain born of a lie, of a love that was hollow from the start. I sank to the floor, my legs no longer able to hold me up, and buried my face in my hands. I sobbed, a deep, ragged sound that felt like it was coming from a place far, far away. I don't know how long I sat there. The sun had long since set, and the apartment was shrouded in a deep, inky blackness. I finally stood up, my body sore and stiff, and began to pack. My clothes, the books, the few small trinkets I had collected over the years. I worked methodically without thought, my mind numb. It was as if my body was running on pure instinct, a survival mechanism kicking in to get me out of the space that no longer belonged to me. I grabbed the old duffel bag I used to take on trips, and shoved my meager belongings inside. My hands brushed against a small leather-bound book on the desk, the one I had left there a few days before. It was my mother's studio ledger, the one she had used to keep track of her clients and her sales. I almost left it there, a silent acknowledgement of the end of this chapter, but something made me stop. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the faded gold lettering on the cover. It was a stupid, pointless thing to take, a record of a business that had never really taken off, but it felt like the only thing I had left that was truly mine. It held the ghost of her touch, the scent of her favorite perfume, and the memory of her laughter. I shoved it into the bag, a small defiant act against the chaos of my life. I had nothing left, and I was about to be homeless, but I had this, and that felt like enough for now. I found myself on the street an hour later, the duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the cold night air a harsh reality against my skin. I didn't have anywhere to go. All my friends were Jareth's friends, and my family was gone. I walked for hours, the bag growing heavier with every step, the city lights a blur of cold indifference. The world was full of people, full of cars and bright loud things, but I was completely alone. I finally stopped at a gas station, my feet aching, and bought a single bottle of water with the last of my change. I sat on the curb, the cold concrete a poor substitute for a bed, and felt a quiet simmering rage begin to take hold. I wasn't just sad anymore, I was angry. I was angry at Jareth for his cruelty, for his betrayal, for the way he had so easily discarded me. I was angry at the world for letting something like this happen, and I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. I sat there for a long time, the cold seeping into my bones, and watched the cars drive by. I was a ghost in my own city, a nobody, a person without a home or a future. But I had a secret in my bag, something Jareth didn't know I had. Something he would want. He had thrown me out like a piece of garbage, but he had left me with a weapon. He had left me with the key to the studio, a key that unlocked not just my past, but also his future. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he would come back for it. The next morning I woke up in my car, the cramped back seat a poor excuse for a bed, the early morning sun a painful assault on my eyes. My body ached, my head pounded, and the deep, profound sense of loss from the night before was still there, a cold, unblinking sentinel in the back of my mind. I stared out the window at a world that looked completely alien to me, the people walking by, the cars driving past, the city buildings rising up against the pale morning sky. It all felt like a backdrop to a movie I wasn't in anymore. I was a spectator in my own life, watching it fall apart from the outside. I pulled out my phone. The small cracked screen, a painful reminder of my past life. I had a few messages, a few missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, but no word from Jareth. Of course not. He was gone. He had a new life, a new car, a new everything. And I had a car full of my possessions and nowhere to go. I had no family, no friends, no one to turn to. I felt a wave of nausea, the sharp acidic taste of a panic attack rising up in my throat. I tried to calm myself, to breathe, to remember that I was still alive, that I was still here. But it was hard. It was hard to remember what it felt like to be a person, to have a purpose, to have a home. I spent the next few hours driving aimlessly, the small amount of gas I had left in the tank a constant ticking clock. I drove past the old neighborhood, past the places Jareth and I used to go, and each one felt like a small fresh wound. The small coffee shop where we had our first date, the park where we had talked for hours, the old movie theater where we had laughed until our sides hurt. It was all gone, all a ghost now, a memory that felt like it belonged to someone else. I finally pulled into a quiet, secluded side street and turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet kind of despair that settled over me like a blanket. I was at the bottom of the world and there was nowhere left to fall. I finally took a look at my phone. The missed calls were from an unknown number and the messages were from Jareth's lawyer. I felt a flicker of something, a small spark of defiance. He was already trying to clean up the mess he had made. The message was short, clinical, and to the point. He wanted the ledger back. He said it was a business document that had been misplaced and that it was legally his. I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my chest. He was a liar. He was a thief. And now he was a coward hiding behind a lawyer. My anger flared, a hot, bright flame in the cold darkness of my despair. He thought he could just take everything, and then have the audacity to come after the one thing I had left, the one thing that was truly mine. The rage gave me a new kind of strength. I knew I couldn't fight him on his terms. He had money, power, and lawyers. All I had was a beat-up car and a book. But I had a secret he didn't know. I had looked through the ledger and it wasn't just a simple business book. It had my mother's intricate, unique signature on every page, and it had a series of strange numbers and codes written in the margins. It was a mystery, a puzzle, and it felt like a silent message from the grave. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this wasn't just about a business ledger, it was about something much, much bigger. I had no idea what it was, but I knew I wasn't going to give it up, not now, not ever. I had nothing to lose, and everything to gain. I felt a small thrill, a dangerous sense of purpose, a flicker of defiance. I was a ghost, a nobody, but I had the one thing Jareth couldn't live without. I was going to use it. I was going to make him pay, and I was going to do it on my own terms. I would find a way to make him bleed, to make him feel the pain that I was feeling. He had left me with nothing, but he had given me the one thing I needed to fight back. He had given me a weapon. I finally had a plan. My anger was no longer a useless emotion. It was a fuel, a source of strength, a quiet, burning fire that would carry me through the days to come. I was ready to play his game. I was ready to make him suffer. The following days were a study in pure, unadulterated survival. I used what little money I had left to buy cheap food cans of soup, crackers, a jar of peanut butter, and I spent my nights sleeping in the car, parking in different neighborhoods to avoid drawing attention to myself. The cold had seeped into my bones, and my body was a constant, dull throb of pain. The only thing that kept me going was the quiet, burning anger in my chest, and the small leather-bound book that sat in the passenger seat beside me. It was my only companion, my only link to a past that felt so very far away. I had tried to decipher the codes in the margins, the strange looping symbols and numbers, but they were meaningless to me. I had even gone to the local library poring over books on cryptography, but I was a potter, not a spy. I finally gave up, the frustration a bitter taste in my mouth. The ledger was a weapon, but I didn't know how to use it. I was a warrior without a sword, a ghost without a body. I felt a deep, profound sense of failure. He had won, and I was left with nothing but this useless book. My hope, which had been so bright and fierce just a few days before, was slowly flickering out, a small, sad candle in the wind. I was starting to lose hope. I was driving through a small, older neighborhood, the houses with chipped paint and overgrown lawns, when I saw a small sign in a window, "Room for Rent." My heart, which had been a heavy, lifeless thing in my chest, gave a small, tentative flutter. I pulled over, my hands shaking on the wheel, and stared at the sign. It was a long shot, I knew. I had no money for a deposit, no references, and I probably looked like a feral stray. But I had to try. I had to do something. The alternative was another night in the car, another day of cold and hunger, another step closer to a breakdown. I walked to the door, my feet heavy and slow, and knocked. The door opened to a small, kind-faced woman with a mop of gray hair and eyes that were both weary and full of a quiet, compassionate fire. Her name was Oswin. She was an old woman, a widow, who had more empty rooms than she had people to fill them. I told her my story, the edited for public version, the one where my boyfriend had just left, and she had just nodded, her eyes full of a quiet understanding. She didn't ask for a deposit, she just asked for the first week's rent, and she said I could pay her the rest when I could. I gave her the last of my money, and she showed me to a small clean room with a single bed and a window that overlooked a small garden. I collapsed on the bed, the clean sheets a cool balm against my skin, and felt a profound sense of relief. I was safe. For now. I was still broke, still alone, but I was not on the street. The next day, I found a small, cheap space to rent in an old, abandoned factory. It was a ghost of my mother's studio, a dark, dusty room with a single window that was perpetually dirty. But it was a start. I bought a used potter's wheel and a bag of clay with the last of my money, and I began to work. The feel of the wet, cool clay in my hands was a comfort, a familiar rhythm in a world that was so strange and foreign. It was a way to ground myself, to remember who I was before all of this. I made small, simple things, tiny bowls and mugs, and I sold them to local cafes and stores. It was barely enough to keep a roof over my head and food in my stomach, but it was enough to survive. I was slowly starting to rebuild my life, a small piece at a time. The anger was still there, a constant low thrum in my veins, but it was no longer a source of despair. It was a source of strength. And then the email came. It was short, a single paragraph, and it was from a new lawyer, a different law firm than before. It wasn't a threat, it was a demand. "We need the ledger," it said. It is a crucial part of a financial audit. We need to know who the original owner was, and we need your mother's signature to verify her identity. This is not a request. I felt a shiver of fear run down my spine. The words felt cold and clinical, but the intent was clear. They knew I had it, they knew what it was, and they were coming for it. The email was a turning point, a final chilling realization. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about something much, much bigger. The words felt like a declaration of war. My quiet little life had just been shattered again. I was no longer just a victim. I was an enemy. The email from the lawyer sat in my inbox like a poisonous snake, its words a constant nagging threat. It was an impossible demand, an order from a world that I was no longer a part of. But it also proved something. It proved that the ledger was worth something. It proved that Jareth wanted it. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a rush of cold, calculated fury. He had thrown me out like yesterday's trash, and now, he needed me. He needed the one thing he couldn't buy, the one thing he had left behind. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I had been so convinced that the ledger was useless, a simple sentimental trinket, but it was the one thing that could give me leverage. I knew I couldn't just give it back. I knew I had to play this game, but I also knew I couldn't do it alone. I was a potter, not a lawyer. I had no idea what to do, what to say, or who to trust. I felt a deep sense of panic, a fear that I was in over my head, that I was playing a game with people who had no morals and no limits. I was a tiny fish in a very large, very predatory pond. I felt like I was drowning. My head was spinning. The words of the email were a constant humming drone in my mind, a relentless reminder that I was in danger, that I was a target. I had to think. I had to find a way out of this. I walked to the kitchen, my feet heavy and slow, and made a cup of instant coffee. The cheap, bitter liquid was a comfort, a small, familiar ritual in a world that was completely upside down. Oswin, my landlord and friend, walked into the kitchen, a quiet shadow in the early morning light. She had an almost preternatural ability to know when I was in distress. She looked at me, her eyes kind and knowing, and she just sat down, waiting for me to speak. I finally told her everything. The whole story. Jareth, the money, the betrayal, the car, the pawn shop, the room, the studio, and finally the email. I told her about the ledger, about the codes, about my mother's signature. She listened, her face a mask of silent compassion, and when I was finished, she just nodded. She didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. She just sat there, her quiet presence a source of strength. "You need to talk to my niece, Raina," she said, her voice a low, steady whisper. "She's in law school. She'll know what to do." My heart gave a small, hopeful thump. I hadn't even considered it. I had been so focused on my own pain, on my own struggles, that I had forgotten that there were people who could help me. Raina was a bright, curious young woman with a sharp mind and a quiet, fierce resolve. She was a different kind of person from me. She lived in a world of logic and reason, a world I had no access to. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that she was my only hope. Raina arrived an hour later, a small, precise whirlwind of a person, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her eyes sharp and intelligent. I laid out the ledger on the small kitchen table, and I watched as she flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing my mother's beautiful swirling script. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just looked. She looked at the signature, at the codes, at the small, almost invisible notes in the margins. I held my breath, waiting for her to tell me that it was useless, that I was in danger, that I had to give it back. But she didn't. She finally looked up, her eyes wide with a quiet, profound shock. "This isn't just a ledger, Maribel," she said, her voice a low whisper. "This is a statement. This is a record. Your mother was a witness to something very big. These codes, these numbers, they're not random. They're a timeline. They're a blueprint. Your mother was documenting something, and her signature was a key, a way to verify that this was her work. It's a legal document, a piece of evidence, and Jareth knows it. His lawyers know it. This isn't just about an audit. This is about a cover-up. They need to get this back before it's too late." I felt a chill run down my spine. The truth was far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. My mother's ghost, her quiet, compassionate ghost, had just spoken, and she had given me a A very powerful, very dangerous weapon. Raina finally looked up, a small, cold smile on her face. You have leverage, she said. You have something they want, and you don't have to give it back. We can negotiate. We can make a deal. We can make them pay for what they did to you. But we have to be careful. They will do anything to get this back. Anything. The last word hung in the air, a cold, heavy threat. I looked down at the ledger, at the familiar, beautiful signature, and I felt a new kind of fear. This was a game I had never wanted to play. A game with rules I didn't know, and with a player who had already shown that he was willing to do anything to win. I was in danger, but I also had power. I had a choice. I could give it back and go back to being a ghost, or I could use it and fight back. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that there was no going back. The silence in Jareth's new penthouse was a constant, suffocating weight. It was a space designed for luxury, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a skyline of glittering lights, a kitchen with appliances he didn't know how to use, and furniture so modern and sterile it felt like a museum exhibit. But it wasn't a home. It was a cage. He had bought it 3 days ago. A frantic, desperate purchase to prove to himself that he was happy, that he had made the right choice, that all of this was worth it. But he wasn't happy. He was terrified. He paced the long, silent hallways, his footsteps a loud, jarring noise in the quiet, and he felt like a ghost, a small, insignificant shadow in a world of glass and steel. He had money, more money than he could ever spend, and it felt like a curse. It was a weight on his shoulders, a source of constant, low-level panic. The world had gone silent, and all he could hear was the frantic beating of his own heart. He had lost the one thing that had made his life real, and he had done it for this, and now, this was about to be taken away from him. He was on the phone with Lyle, his new lawyer, a man with a voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel. Lyle was not a friend. He was a professional, a hired gun, a man who spoke in numbers and legal jargon. The audit is proceeding, Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. The firm is looking into all of your assets. The money is frozen until we can prove its legitimacy. The problem, as I explained to you, is the source of the funds. They are asking for a full, detailed accounting of your family's business dealings. They're looking for a paper trail. They're looking for a reason to seize the money, and they found a discrepancy, a very big discrepancy. Jareth's stomach clenched, a cold, hard knot. He knew what Lyle was talking about. He knew the name of the discrepancy, the dark, ugly secret that his father had tried to bury years ago. He had always known that his father, a ruthless, cold man named Cal, had made his fortune on the backs of others, but he had never wanted to look too closely. He had never wanted to know the truth. But now the truth was a ghost, a phantom that was coming to haunt him. The truth was Maribel's mother, and the ledger. Lyle sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. They've found a copy of a document, a legal contract, that has a forged signature on it. It's your father's old company. The signature is of a woman named Raina Dixon. They've been unable to find any other record of her. We need to prove that the document is a fake, or that she was a real person, or that her signature was real. The document is the only thing standing between you and a full criminal investigation, and we can't find a single other record of her work, of her signature, of her existence. They think it's a fake, and if they can prove it, your winnings, all $29 million, will be seized and given to the state. It will be gone. All of it. Jareth's hand, which had been holding the phone to his ear, began to shake. Raina Dixon. The name felt like a punch to the gut. It was Maribel's mother's name. He had forgotten. He had been so focused on the money, on the escape, that he had forgotten the small human details of her life. He had forgotten her mother, her quiet, sad story, her death. He had forgotten the ledger. He had left it on the desk. He had left the one thing he needed to prove that his family was not a web of lies. He had thrown it away, along with the woman he had loved. He finally found his voice, a small, weak whisper. What do we do? He asked. We need to find her, Lyle said, his voice a low, cold whisper. We need to get her to testify. We need to get the ledger. The original. We need to prove that her signature was real. We need it. We can't win without it, and if she doesn't give it back, you're finished, Mr. Hayes. Your fortune is worthless. Your new life is a lie. You are a prisoner in your own penthouse. The phone rang, a shrill, jarring sound that cut through the quiet of my small studio. I almost didn't answer it. I had been so focused on my work, on the feel of the cool, wet clay in my hands, that I had almost forgotten about the outside world. I looked at the screen, and the number was unknown. My stomach tightened. It was him. I knew it. He had found me. I felt a surge of fear, a cold, sharp dread, that he would just show up, that he would try to force me to give him the ledger, but I also felt a deep, profound sense of resolve. I had a new life now, a quiet, simple life that was mine and mine alone. I had a home, I had a purpose, and I had my dignity. I was no longer the girl he had thrown out. I was a woman who was rebuilding her life, one piece at a time. I was not going to give that up. I finally answered the phone, my voice a low, steady whisper. "Hello?" I said, and the word felt like a challenge, a small, defiant act. The voice on the other end was familiar, a voice I had once loved more than anything in the world. It was Jareth. But he wasn't yelling. He wasn't demanding. He was pleading. "Maribel," he said, his voice a soft, desperate whisper. "Please, don't hang up. I need to talk to you." The sound of his voice, the simple human sound of it, was a physical blow. It was the sound of a man who was no longer in control, a man who was drowning. I felt a flicker of something, a small spark of sympathy, a memory of the person I had once loved. But I pushed it down. I pushed it down and held on to my rage. The memory of him throwing me out, of his cold, clinical cruelty, was still too fresh, too raw. "What do you want, Jareth?" I said, my voice flat and emotionless. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "I need the ledger, Maribel," he said. "I need it back. It's a crucial part of my legal case. I can't explain it over the phone, but I need it. Please." He was begging. The man who had once been so full of pride and arrogance was now reduced to a begging man. I felt a small, bitter sense of satisfaction. It was a good feeling, a cold, sweet revenge, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, the humiliation, the cold nights in my car. It wasn't enough to bring back my old life. "I don't have it," I lied, the words a silent challenge. "And even if I did, why would I give it to you? You threw me out. You took everything, and now you want the last thing I have? You think I'm just going to give it back? You think I'm stupid?" My voice was rising, my anger a hot, uncontainable fire. He was silent for a moment, and I could hear the sound of his ragged breath on the other end of the line. "I'll give you money, Maribel," he said, the words a desperate, hollow promise. "I'll give you $1 million, $2 million, whatever you want. Just give me the ledger back. Please." I laughed then, a cold, bitter laugh that felt like a mockery of everything we had once been. "You think you can just buy me back?" I said. "You think you can just pay for my forgiveness? You're so wrong, Jareth. You're so wrong. You can keep your money. I don't want it. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to leave me alone." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking, and I just stood there staring at the small blank screen. He had tried to buy me back, but he had failed. He had tried to use his money to solve a problem that was far bigger than any number. He was a fool, and now I had to be careful. He knew where I was. He knew what I had, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me, that he would not give up. I felt a deep, profound sense of danger. He was no longer a ghost from my past. He was a threat, a very real, very present threat, and I had to be ready for him. The silence of the studio, which had once been a source of peace, was now a source of dread. I was alone, and he was coming. The next day, the rain came down in a cold, hard sheet, a relentless downpour that mirrored the storm raging inside me. I was working in my small, dark studio, the rhythmic turn of the wheel a source of both comfort and frustration. I was trying to block out the world, to forget about the phone call, to forget about Jareth and his desperate, hollow promises. But it was impossible. His voice, his pleas, his desperation, echoed in my mind, a constant nagging reminder of the man he had once been. I felt a small, ugly sense of satisfaction. He was suffering. He was paying for what he had done, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make up for the cold, lonely nights, for the humiliation, for the betrayal. I needed more. I needed a confession. I needed him to tell me why. I needed him to tell me what was going on. I had a feeling that the ledger was just the tip of a very large, very dark iceberg. And I was right. I was cleaning up, wiping down the potter's wheel, when I heard a small, hesitant knock on the door. My heart dropped. I knew who it was. I walked to the door, my hands shaking, and opened it just a crack. He was there, standing in the cold, wet street, his clothes soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked small, insignificant, and terribly sad. He was no longer the arrogant, cruel man who had thrown me out. He was just Jareth, a boy lost in the rain. "Maribel," he said, his voice a low, ragged whisper. "Please. I need to talk to you. I can't do this over the phone." I shook my head. "Go away, Jareth," I said, my voice a cold, flat sound. "I have nothing to say to you. You made your choice. You chose the money. Now live with it." He flinched, as if my words were a physical blow. He looked down at the ground, and I saw a single clear tear run down his cheek, mixing with the rain. My heart, which had been so hard and cold just a moment before, gave a small, painful twist. I finally opened the door. He walked in, a small, dripping ghost, and stood there, in the middle of my small, quiet studio, a testament to everything he had discarded. He finally looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "I'm not here to beg for money, Maribel," he said, his voice a low, broken sound. "I'm here to tell the truth. My father, Cal, he made his fortune on a lie. He ran a shell company, a fraudulent business that was used to launder money for some very powerful, very dangerous people. He needed a way to make it look legitimate, and he used a fake signature on a legal document, a contract that was a witness to his crimes. The signature he used was of a woman he had hired to work for him, a quiet, unassuming woman who was a ceramic artist. The woman's name was Raina Dixon. Your mother, Maribel." He used her name, her signature, her life to cover his own lies. And the ledger. The ledger is a record of everything she saw, everything she knew. He didn't know she was a witness. He didn't know she was documenting his crimes. And when he found out, he tried to get her to sign a new contract, a new document, but she refused. She was going to go to the police, and she died in an accident. An accident that wasn't an accident. She died because of a lie. My father's lie. And now, the company that he did business with, they are conducting an audit of all their assets. They've found the forged contract. They're coming after him. They're coming after me. And the ledger. The ledger is the only way to prove that my father was the one who forged it, not me. It's the only thing that can save me from a life in prison. I'm sorry, Maribel. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know. He never told me. I thought the money was a clean start. I thought it was a way out, but it's just a cage. I'm a prisoner. He won the money, and he threw you out because he was scared. He was scared that you would find out the truth. He was scared that you would expose him, and he was scared that if you ever did, he wouldn't have a future. He threw you out because he was a coward. I just wanted to leave it all behind, Maribel. I just wanted to get out, but he followed me. He followed me to a place where I thought I was safe. And now, I have to make a choice. I have to choose between a lie and the truth. And I don't know what to do. I stood there listening to him, the cold, hard rain outside a distant murmur. The air in the studio was thick with his confession, a heavy, suffocating weight. My heart, which had been so full of rage and defiance just moments before, was now a cold, hollow ache. The pieces of the puzzle, the ones I had been trying to put together for days, were suddenly all in place. My mother's death, the forged documents, the secrets, the codes in the ledger, the sudden, cruel betrayal. It all made sense. My mother had not died in an accident. She had been murdered. Murdered by a man named Cal, a man who was Jareth's father. I felt a quiet, simmering rage begin to burn, a different kind of anger than before. This was not a personal betrayal. This was a crime. This was a lie that had stolen a life, a lie that had destroyed a family. The tears that I had held back for days, for weeks, now fell in a hot, silent stream down my cheeks. I was not crying for Jareth. I was crying for my mother, for the life she had lost, for the truth that had been buried with her. The man in front of me, the one who was standing in the middle of my small, quiet studio, was a lie. His tears were a lie. His sorrow was a lie. He had not come here for forgiveness. He had come here for a solution. He had come here to save himself. He was a coward, a small, insignificant man who was now reaping the consequences of his family's sins. I felt a wave of nausea. I had loved this man. I had trusted him with everything, and he had just told me that his love was a lie, a means to an end. It was all a game to him, a game with a very, very high price. "You're a liar, Jareth," I said, my voice a low, cold whisper. "You're a liar and a thief and a coward. You didn't come here to confess. You came here to save yourself. You came here because you were cornered. You knew. You knew about the ledger. You knew about my mother. You just didn't know I had it. You were willing to throw me away for money for a life you thought you deserved. And now when that life is in danger, you come crawling back, begging for my help. I'm not a tool, Jareth. I'm not a pawn. I'm a person. My mother was a person, and you're just a disgrace. I turned my back on him and I began to walk away. I couldn't look at him anymore. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with him. He was a constant living reminder of everything I had lost. He grabbed my arm and I flinched away, my skin crawling at his touch. Maribel, please, he said, his voice a desperate whisper. You don't understand. I had to do what I had to do. My father, he's a very dangerous man. He would have done anything to get that ledger. He would have hurt you. I was trying to protect you. I laughed, a short, humorless bark. You think you were protecting me, I said. You threw me out into the street. You left me with nothing. You think that was protection. That was cruelty. That was an act of pure, unadulterated selfishness. You didn't care about me. You only cared about yourself. I pulled my arm away and walked to the door. He was a monster, just like his father. He was a coward, just like his father. He was a man who was so terrified of the truth that he was willing to throw away the one thing that had ever been real in his life. He was a lost cause. He was a broken man. I looked at him and I saw a reflection of my own despair, my own anger, my own loneliness. I was just like him in a way. I was just as broken, but I had a choice. I could be a victim, or I could be a survivor. I could be a ghost, or I could be a warrior. He had made his choice. Now it was my turn. Maribel, he said, his voice a low, defeated whisper. You have to help me. You have to expose him. He's a monster. He'll take everything. He'll take the money. He'll take my life. You're the only one who can stop him. I looked at him and I saw the desperate, hollow pleading in his eyes. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a child, a small, frightened child, who had gotten himself into a world of trouble and had no idea how to get out. I can't help you, Jareth, I said, my voice a low, sad whisper. I can't help you. I can only help myself. I opened the door and he flinched, as if the cold rain was a physical blow. He stood there for a long moment, a single sad figure in the pouring rain, and then he turned and walked away. I watched him go, a small, lonely figure in a world that was suddenly full of secrets and lies, and then I saw the car, a long black sedan, parked down the street. It was a car that didn't belong here, and there was a woman in the driver's seat, a tall, cold-faced woman with a razor-sharp gaze. She was watching me, and she was smiling. The woman in the black sedan was named Cassidy. Her smile was thin, a precise, calculated curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were chips of ice, sharp and clear and completely devoid of warmth. She was a lawyer, Jareth's father's lawyer, and she was a predator. She was everything that Jareth wasn't, cold, calm, and completely in control. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She came to my small studio and she sat in a chair I had made, her back straight, her hands clasped in her lap, and she watched me with an unnerving, silent intensity. We know what you have, Maribel, she said, her voice a low, purring whisper. We know about the ledger, and we want it back. Her words were a statement, not a question. It was a cold, clinical declaration of war. I felt a surge of fear, a cold, sharp dread that she would just take it, that she would just reach out and grab it and there would be nothing I could do. But I also felt a deep, profound sense of resolve. I had a choice. I could be a pawn or I could be a player. I had the upper hand and she knew it. The power was in my hands. I just had to be smart enough to use it. I shook my head. It's not for sale, I said, my voice a low, steady whisper. And it's not yours, it's my mother's, and it's evidence. She laughed, a short, dry sound that was completely devoid of humor. Evidence of what? A business that never made it? A dream that died? She said, her voice dripping with scorn. I think you're overestimating its value, Maribel. It's just a book, a piece of paper, and it's in the way. Your little studio is in the way. Your little friends are in the way. You're in the way. I can make all of this disappear. I can make your life a living hell. Or I can make it easy. I can make you a rich woman. $10 million for a book that has no value to you. Think of all the things you could do. You could buy a new life. You could have a new studio. You could have a new beginning. Just give us the book, and all of this goes away. All of it. She was offering me a way out, a chance to escape from this nightmare. But the words were a poison, a tempting lie. $10 million. It was a number that was as big and as meaningless as 29 million. It was a number that could change my life, a number that could buy me a new life. But it was a number that was born of a lie, of a betrayal, of a crime. It was a number that was born of my mother's death. I couldn't take it. I couldn't do it. My conscience, my heart, my soul screamed at me to refuse. The money would be a ghost, a curse that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I couldn't do it. I shook my head. No, I said, my voice a low, steady whisper. I'm not selling it. I'm not selling my mother's memory. I'm not selling the truth. You can keep your money. I don't want it. Her eyes, which had been so cold and calm, now flared with a cold, contained fury. You are making a very big mistake, Marbil, she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. You have no idea who you are messing with. My client is a very powerful man. He will find you. He will find your friends. He will find your family. He will make your life a living hell. And you will have nothing. You will have nothing but this useless book and a life full of regret. Think of your old friend Oswin. She's an old woman. She has no one. She's so frail. It would be a shame if something were to happen to her. It would be a shame if something were to happen to your little studio. It would be a shame if you were to lose everything all over again. A terrible, terrible shame. She was threatening me. She was threatening the one person who had been kind to me, the one person who had given me a home, the one person who had given me a reason to live. I felt a deep, cold, profound sense of terror. I was in over my head. I was playing a game with a person who had no limits, who had no conscience. I had to do something. I had to protect Oswin. I had to protect myself. I had to make a choice, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the choice was not just about me anymore. It was about all of us. I looked at her, and I saw a reflection of the cold, cruel world that had taken my mother, that had taken my life, that had taken everything. She was a ghost, a monster, a shadow, and she was smiling. I was in my studio late that night, the rain a distant, mournful hum against the window panes. My hands were shaking and my heart was a frantic, terrified drum against my ribs. I had been up all night, unable to sleep, haunted by Cassidy's cold, menacing voice. The threat against Oswin was a constant, nagging terror, a weight that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had to do something. I had to find a way to protect her. I had been so focused on my own pain, on my own revenge, that I had forgotten that my life was not the only one at stake. I was playing a game with a monster who was willing to hurt innocent people to get what she wanted. I was a fool. I had been a fool to think I could fight back. I was so small, so insignificant, and she was so powerful, so ruthless. I felt a deep, profound sense of despair. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I was alone, and I was so scared. I felt a single hot tear roll down my cheek. I was a child in a grown-up's world, a small, frightened child who had gotten herself into a world of trouble. I picked up the ledger, my fingers tracing my mother's signature, and I felt a strange sense of comfort. It was a link to her, a link to a past that was so much simpler, so much safer. I had to do something. I had to make a choice. I had to find a way out of this, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the answer was in the book. I looked at the codes again, the strange looping symbols and numbers that I had been trying to decipher for days. I had been looking for a cipher, a code, a key, but I had been looking in the wrong place. The codes weren't a key, they were a location, they were an address. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a rush of pure, unadulterated shock. I had a location. I had a place to go. I had a person to talk to. I had a new, terrifying mystery, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the person at the other end of this address was a ghost. My mother's ghost, a ghost that was still alive. I took a deep breath and I reached for my phone. The number was in the back of the book, written in my mother's hand, a small, precise number that had been a part of her life for years. I had never noticed it before. I had never thought to look. But it was there, and it was a direct line to a man named Boone. I had never heard of him, but his name was written next to the address, a small, unassuming name that held the key to a world of secrets and lies. I dialed the number, my finger trembling on the screen, and I held my breath, waiting for the sound of a ringing phone. He answered on the first ring, his voice a low, weary whisper. "Hello," he said. "Who is this?" I felt a surge of relief, a profound sense of hope. He was a real person. He was a living, breathing human being. "My name is Maribel," I said, my voice a low, trembling whisper. "My mother's name was Raina Dixon. I have her ledger. I found your name in it." The silence that followed was a heavy, suffocating weight. I could hear the sound of his ragged breath on the other end of the line. "The ledger," he finally said, his voice a low, defeated whisper. "I thought that was gone forever. Your mother, she was a good woman, Maribel. A very good woman. She was a witness. She was a whistleblower. She was trying to expose Cal Hayes, his company, his crimes. The ledger was her diary, her coded record of everything she saw, everything she knew. She was trying to get help. She was trying to go to the police. But she was too scared. She was scared of him. He was a powerful man, a very powerful man, and she was just a small, insignificant Potter. She was a ghost. And then she died. In an accident that wasn't an accident. She died because she knew too much. She died because of a lie. She died because of a crime. And you have the key to everything. You have the ledger. You have the truth. He will stop at nothing to get it back. Nothing. And he will find you. He will find you and he will kill you, just like he killed your mother." The truth, once spoken aloud, was no longer a ghost. It was a living, breathing thing, a cold, brutal monster. My mother's death, which had been a quiet, private sorrow for so many years, was now a public crime, a violent, ugly truth that had been hidden from me for so long. I felt a quiet, simmering rage begin to burn, a fire that was fueled by a new, more profound sense of injustice. Jareth, Cal, Cassidy, they were not just liars. They were murderers. They had taken my mother's life and now they were trying to take mine. I was no longer a victim. I was a witness. I was a survivor. And I was going to fight back. I had a choice. I could run. I could hide. Or I could use the truth to expose them. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that there was no going back. I had to face them. I had to make them pay for what they had done. I had to make them feel the pain that I was feeling. I had to get justice for my mother. I called Jareth, my voice a low, steady whisper. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I just told him to meet me. He agreed, a small, defeated sound. He was a broken man, a small, insignificant pawn in a very big, very dangerous game. He came to the studio an hour later, a small, silent figure in a world that was suddenly too big for him. He was no longer the cruel, arrogant man who had thrown me out. He was just a boy, a lost child who had gotten himself into a world of trouble. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a quiet, profound despair. "Maribel," he said, his voice a low, broken sound. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know." I just shook my head. "It's too late, Jareth," I said. "It's too late for apologies. I know the truth. I know what your father did to my mother. I know what he did to me, and now I'm going to expose him. I'm going to tell the world what he did. I'm going to make him pay." He flinched, as if my words were a physical blow. He looked down at the ground, and a single clear tear fell from his eye. He was a coward. He was a monster. He was just like his father. Just then the door opened, and Cal walked in. He was a tall, imposing figure, with a face that was a mask of cold, unblinking anger. He was a man who was used to getting what he wanted, a man who was used to living in a world of lies and secrets. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a cold, calculating fury. He had come here for the ledger. He had come here to finish what he had started. He was a monster. He was a ghost. He was the man who had killed my mother. "Give me the book, girl," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper, "and all of this goes away. All of it. I will give you a new life. I will give you anything you want. Just give me the book." I shook my head. "No," I said, my voice a low, steady whisper. "I'm not giving you anything. You took my mother. You took my life. You took everything. And now I'm going to take everything from you." He laughed, a short, dry sound that was completely devoid of humor. "You're just a small, insignificant girl," he said. "You're a Potter. You have nothing. You have no power. You are nothing. I looked at him and I smiled. I have the truth, I said. And the truth is a very powerful thing. Your name is on every page of this book, every single one, and my mother's signature is a key that unlocks a world of secrets and lies. I have the power, Cal. I have the power to expose you. I have the power to destroy you, and I'm going to do it. The air in the studio was electric, charged with a cold, terrifying suspense. Cal was a predator, a monster who was used to getting what he wanted. He took a step toward me, and I felt a surge of fear, a cold, sharp dread that he would just take it, that he would just grab the book and there would be nothing I could do. But I stood my ground. I stood my ground and I looked him in the eye. I was not a small, insignificant girl anymore. I was a witness, I was a survivor, and I was going to get justice. Jareth was standing there, a small, silent figure in the corner, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. He was caught between two worlds, the world of his father, a world of lies and secrets, and the world of his past, a world of love and truth. He had to make a choice, a final terrifying choice. He was a coward, but he was not a murderer. He was a lost child, but he was not a monster. He had a choice. He could choose to be a man, or he could choose to be a coward. I looked at him and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a flicker of hope, a flicker of a memory of a time when we had nothing, when we had each other, and when that had been enough. I looked back at Cal and I saw a different man, a man who was a ghost, a man who was nothing but a lie, a man who was a monster. He had no love in his heart, he had no soul, he was a hollow man, a man who had sold his soul for money. I took a step toward Jareth, and I held out my hand. Jareth, I said, my voice a low, steady whisper. You have a choice. You can choose to be a man, you can choose to tell the truth, you can choose to expose him, or you can choose to be a ghost. You can choose to be a liar, you can choose to be a monster. You can choose to be just like him. It's your choice, and it's your life. I can't help you. I can only give you a choice. I can only give you a new beginning. He looked at me, and I saw the tears in his eyes. He looked at his father, and I saw the cold, unblinking fury in his eyes. He had to make a choice. He had to choose between a life of lies and a life of truth. He had to choose between money and a soul. He had to choose between a father who is a monster and a woman who is a witness. He was a coward, but he was also a man who had lost everything. He took a deep breath and he looked at me, and he took my hand. He looked at his father and his voice was a low, steady whisper. I'm sorry, father, he said. I can't do this anymore. I can't live a life of lies. I can't be like you. I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to tell the police everything. I'm going to expose you. I'm going to get justice for Maribel's mother. I'm going to do the right thing. Cal laughed, a short, dry sound that was full of a cold, uncontained fury. He took a step toward us, and his eyes were blazing with a silent, murderous rage. You think you can just turn your back on me, boy, he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. You think you can just throw away everything I've given you? You think you can just walk away? You fool. You're a fool. You're a disgrace. I will destroy you. I will destroy her. I will destroy everything. I will not let you do this. He lunged at us, a sudden, violent blur of motion. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated terror. He was going to kill me. He was going to kill me just like he killed my mother. He was a ghost, a monster, a murderer, and I was going to be another victim, just another ghost in his long, dark history. The security guard, a large, stoic man I had hired with the last of my money, was a ghost in the shadows. He had been a silent witness to everything, a guardian angel I had hired to keep me safe. He lunged at Cal and the two men were a blur of motion, a silent, violent struggle in the heart of my quiet studio. I felt a surge of relief, a profound sense of gratitude. He was a lifesaver. He was a hero. He was a ghost who had come to save me from a monster. He had a gun, and he was holding it to Cal's head. Cal was a monster, a murderer, a ghost, but he was also a coward. He just stood there, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated. He had been so used to being in control, so used to getting what he wanted, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be a human being. He had forgotten what it felt like to be scared. He was a ghost. He was nothing. The police arrived moments later, a loud, jarring blur of red and blue lights, and they took Cal away, a small, sad figure in a world that was suddenly too big for him. He was a monster, a murderer, a ghost, but he was also a man who had lost everything. He was a prisoner in a cage of his own making. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, police interviews and endless questions. Jareth told the truth. He confessed everything. The money, the lies, the secrets, the murder. He was a coward, but he was also a man who was trying to do the right thing. He was trying to get justice for my mother. He was trying to get a new beginning. The money, the $29 million, was frozen, pending an investigation. It was a ghost, a number that was as big and as meaningless as it had always been. It was a curse that had ruined a life. It was a lie that had destroyed a family. It was a thing that had cost a soul. And it was gone. Jareth was facing his own legal battles, a long, painful road to redemption, but he was doing the right thing. He was trying to be a man. We didn't get back together. We couldn't. The ghosts of our past were still there, still haunting us, still a painful reminder of everything we had lost. But we were friends. We were survivors. We were a new kind of family. He came to my studio one day, a small, silent figure in a world that was suddenly too big for him, and he just sat there, watching me work. He had no money. He had no power. He had no home. He was a man who had nothing, but he had a soul, and that was enough. He helped me get a new studio, a big, beautiful space, with a large window that overlooked the city. It was a place that was full of light, a place that was full of hope. It was a place that was a testament to a new beginning, a new life, and I was finally home. The day came when I went back to the pawnshop, the same dusty, forgotten place where I had laid the last piece of my old life. The man behind the counter, a gaunt, quiet man with eyes that had seen too many desperate moments, picked up the ring with a practiced, gentle care. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He just looked at me, and his eyes were full of a quiet, compassionate understanding. I had come for the ring, my mother's ring, the last piece of my old life, a memory that was now a testament to a new beginning. I laid the money on the counter, a small, precise number that was a symbol of my new life, a symbol of my freedom. I looked at the ring, and I saw a reflection of a woman who had fought back, a woman who had survived, a woman who had gotten justice for her mother. I was a survivor. I was a witness. I was a ghost who had found her voice. I took the ring, and I slipped it on my finger. It was a perfect fit. It was a symbol of everything I had lost, and everything I had gained. The world was a cold, cruel place, but it was also a place full of hope, a place full of quiet, gentle moments. I had a new life, a new beginning, and a new story. A story that was a testament to the fact that money was just a number, that love was a choice, and that the truth was a very powerful thing. My mother was gone, but her ghost was a witness. Her ghost was a warrior. Her ghost was a woman who had found a new life, and she was a part of me.